Hold still. Your hair is so difficult, and I don't even know why. 저 피부 좀 봐. 아무도 읽고 싶어 하지 않는지도 같아. 27 years old. Still living in this house. Still cutting vegetables in the kitchen like she's one of the staff. She basically is the staff. If you don't leave my brother alone, I'll make sure father throws you out before the month ends. Why are you smiling? I just remembered something funny on TikTok.
But wait, because in about 40 minutes, one of the girls in that salon is going to find out MMA understood every single word. And she's about to answer back, in Korean so perfect, it'll make the whole mansion go silent. If you're enjoying the story already, hit that subscribe button. You're going to want to see how far this goes. Also, drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from tonight. Now let's go back to where it all started so you can understand what led to this moment and how it'll end 24 years earlier. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days when a woman named Adayaze walked through the gates of the Choi estate carrying a single suitcase and a sleeping infant strapped to her back. She wasn't Korean, she wasn't rich, she wasn't even supposed to be there. But the Choi family needed a nanny, and Adayaze needed a home for herself and her 3-year-old daughter, MMA. You understand this is a live-in position, Mr. Choi had said that first day, studying her carefully. You'll be raising my children alongside your own. Adaze had simply nodded. I know how to love children, sir. That's all this job requires. She was right. Inside the nursery, 3 newborns waited. Yun, Sora, and their brother, born only minutes apart. Triplets. Loud, demanding, exhausting. And little MMA, barely older than a toddler herself, would sit on the nursery floor for hours, watching her mother rock each baby to sleep. You want to help? Adayaze would ask, laughing softly. MMA would nod seriously, holding out her small hands. By the time the triplets could walk, MMA was already following them everywhere. Through the gardens, into the kitchen, up the stairs their short legs could barely climb. She wasn't their nanny's daughter. She was simply there. A permanent fixture of their childhood, the way sunlight through the east windows was permanent. The way the smell of their mother's cooking was permanent. Kang, the quiet triplet, the one who watched more than he spoke, attached himself to MMA first. Carry me, he'd demand, even though he was perfectly capable of walking. You're getting heavy. MMA would groan, hoisting him onto her hip anyway. Sora adored her too. In the easy way, children adore anyone who plays with them. But Yaon was different from the beginning. Why does she get to eat with us? Yaon asked her mother once, barely 5 years old, pointing at MMA across the dinner table. Because she's part of this family, sweetheart, Mrs. Choi answered gently. Yaon frowned and said nothing more. But something had already planted itself in her. A small, cold seed of resentment that would take 20 years to fully bloom. Then, when MMA was 11 and the triplets were 8, tragedy arrived without warning. Adaze collapsed in the kitchen one evening while preparing dinner. A blood vessel in her brain, the doctors said. Nothing anyone could have predicted. Nothing anyone could have stopped. MMA sat in the hospital waiting room in her school uniform, still clutching her mother's grocery list, refusing to believe the words the doctor was saying. I'm sorry, the doctor told her. There was nothing we could do. MMA didn't cry, not there, not yet. She simply sat very still, the way she would learn to sit still for the rest of her life, whenever the world tried to break her. That night, Mr. Choi made a decision that surprised everyone, including his own wife. She stays, he said simply. Chulsu, she's not blood. She stays, he repeated. Adayaze gave this family 15 years of loyalty. I won't repay that by putting her daughter on the street. And so, at 11 years old, MMA became something the Choi family never quite had a word for. Not a daughter, not a servant, something in between, beloved by some, tolerated by others, and quietly resented by one. She kept helping around the house as she grew, not because anyone forced her to, but because gratitude ran deep in her bones. She helped in the kitchen. She helped with the triplets' homework. She helped however she could, because helping was the only language she had left to speak to a family that had saved her from nothing and everything at once. Everyone loved her for it, except Yeon. Mrs. Choi found out about the cafeteria incident purely by accident. She'd come to MMA's school that afternoon to drop off a forgotten permission slip, and while waiting in the front office, she overheard two mothers gossiping near the water fountain. "Did you hear what happened to the Choi's nanny's daughter?" one of them said, not realizing who was standing behind them. "Something about her skin condition." The kids were merciless, apparently. Poor thing sat there and took it. Mrs. Choi's blood went cold. She found MMA an hour later in the garden, scrubbing dirt from under her fingernails with far more force than the task required. "Why didn't you tell me?" Mrs. Choi asked gently, sitting down beside her on the garden bench. MMA didn't look up. "It wasn't a big deal. MMA, it's fine. Kids are cruel. It happens to everyone eventually." Mrs. Choi took her hand, the pale patches along MMA's knuckles catching the afternoon light. "It should never have happened to you, and it should never happen to you again without me knowing. Do you understand me? You are not just someone who lives in this house. You are my daughter in every way that matters, and I will go to that school myself if I have to." "Please don't," MMA said quickly. "It'll only make it worse. They'll say I ran to my rich family to fix my problems. You are allowed to have people fix your problems. That is what family is for." MMA finally looked up, and something in her eyes, some old, practiced defense mechanism, cracked slightly. "I don't want to be a problem you have to fix." "You were never a problem," Mrs. Choi said fiercely. "You are the answer to a question I didn't even know I was asking. The day your mother walked through our gates with you on her back. Don't you dare shrink yourself down for the comfort of people who were never worth your tears in the first place." It was one of the only times MMA cried in front of anyone that year. Mrs. Choi held her in the garden until the sun went down, and neither of them ever mentioned the incident to Mr. Choi, though he found out anyway, and quietly arranged for a substantial donation to the school, on the condition that a bullying prevention program be implemented immediately. He never told anyone he'd done it. MMA figured it out years later, when she found the paperwork by accident while helping organize his study, and she never told him she knew. That was simply how the Choi parents loved her. Sideways, sometimes silently, but completely. If you're enjoying the story so far, make sure you hit that subscribe button. This is where things start to get complicated. By the time MMA turned 16, something else had started happening to her skin. Small pale patches, first on her hands, then slowly spreading up her arms. Vitiligo, the doctors called it. Harmless, untreatable, permanent. The other kids at school noticed immediately. "What's wrong with your skin?" a boy asked loudly in the cafeteria one day, loud enough for half the room to hear. MMA felt her face burn. "Nothing's wrong with it. It's just different. It looks like a disease." Laughter rippled through the tables. MMA stared down at her lunch tray, willing herself not to cry in front of everyone. What she didn't know was that Yeon was sitting 3 tables away, and Yeon was smiling. Not out of cruelty exactly. Or maybe exactly out of cruelty. Yeon had never been able to explain to herself why watching MMA get hurt felt like something loosening in her own chest, like a knot untying. Maybe it was jealousy. Maybe it was the years of watching her own brother favor MMA over his actual sisters. Maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe some people just need someone smaller than them to step on. From that day forward, whenever relatives visited the estate, Yeon made sure to introduce MMA the same way, every single time. "This is our nanny," she'd say sweetly, gesturing vaguely. "She helps around the house, never sister, never family, never by name, if she could help it." Sora, always following her sister's lead, began doing the same, but Kang never did. Whenever he came home from boarding school on holidays, the first person he looked for wasn't his sisters. It was MMA. He'd find her in the garden, or in the kitchen, or curled up with a book in the library, and he'd simply sit down beside her, like no time had passed at all. "Your skin looks like a map," he told her once, when she was 17 and he was 14, tracing the pale patch along her forearm with careful curiosity. MMA flinched, expecting an insult. "A map of somewhere I'd want to go," he added simply, and went back to reading his book, like he hadn't just said something that would live in MMA's chest for years. He never once commented on her skin like it was a flaw. He complimented her confidence instead, the way she held her chin up even when people stared, the way she laughed loud in rooms that wanted her small. Before Kang left for boarding school overseas, there had been a night neither of them ever spoke about again. MMA was 17. Kang was 14. It was the night before his flight, and the entire household was in chaos with packing and last-minute goodbyes, and somehow, in the middle of all that noise, the two of them had ended up alone on the back porch steps. "I don't want to go," Kang admitted, picking at a loose thread on his sleeve. "You'll be back for winter break. That's 4 months away." MMA nudged his shoulder with hers. "You'll survive. You survive everything. It's annoying, actually." He laughed, but it faded quickly. "Promise me something." "What?" "Promise you won't let Yeon run you out of here while I'm gone." MMA went quiet for a moment, staring out at the garden lights flickering in the dark. "Your sister doesn't scare me." "I know. That's not what I'm worried about." Kang turned to look at her, 14 years old, but with an intensity in his eyes that belonged to someone much older. "I'm worried you'll convince yourself you don't belong here. That you'll leave before I even get the chance to come back and tell you." He stopped himself. "Tell me what?" MMA asked. Kang shook his head, suddenly looking every bit his age again. "Nothing. Forget it." But she didn't forget it. Not for 4 months. Not for 4 years. That unfinished sentence sat in the back of her mind like a stone she carried without meaning to. Long after she told herself it didn't matter. Long after she told herself he was just a boy who'd grow out of whatever he thought he felt. She was wrong, and some small, quiet part of her had always known it. The arrivals hall at Incheon smelled like coffee and jet fuel, and MMA had been standing near the doors for 20 minutes, checking her phone every few seconds like it might tell her something new. She almost missed him. Her eyes swept past a tall man in a charcoal coat, twice before her brain caught up with what her eyes were seeing. The same jaw, sharper now. The same restless energy in his shoulders, but leashed, controlled, like 4 years overseas had taught him patience he didn't have as a teenager. MMA. Her name and his voice stopped her cold. She turned, and for a moment, neither of them moved. "You got tall," she said, which was the only thing her brain could manage. Kang smiled, the same crooked smile he'd had since he was 6 years old. "You got prettier." MMA rolled her eyes and grabbed one of his suitcases before he could stop her, mostly to have something to do with her hands. 4 years overseas, and that's your best line? I've been saving it. Practiced it on the plane, actually. That's worse. Is it working? She laughed despite herself, and something in her chest tightened at the way he looked at her, like he was seeing her for the first time, and the 100th time all at once. They walked toward the parking garage in a silence that wasn't uncomfortable, exactly, but wasn't the easy silence they used to share either. Something had shifted in the space between them, and neither one wanted to be the first to name it. "How was it?" she asked finally, loading his bags into the trunk. "Overseas. All of it. Lonely," Kang said, more honestly than she expected. "I made friends. I did fine in my classes. My father would say I did better than fine. But every time something good happened, I'd think about telling you, and then remember, you were 7,000 miles away." MMA busied herself with the trunk latch so she wouldn't have to look at him. "You could have called more. I called every week. Every week isn't every day." "Would every day have been enough?" he asked, and there was something underneath the question that made her chest ache in a way she didn't have a name for yet. "Get in the car, Kang." He got in the car, but he was smiling the whole ride home, and MMA spent the entire drive gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly, furious at herself for the way her pulse hadn't slowed down since he said her name in that arrivals hall. That night, the whole household gathered for a welcome home dinner. Mrs. Choi had ordered 3 different caterers just to be safe, and the dining hall was loud with laughter and years of catching up. MMA sat near the end of the table, half listening to Sora recount some story about university, when she felt eyes on her. Kang, across the table, wasn't even pretending not to watch her. "You're staring," she mouthed at him. He shrugged, unbothered, and kept staring anyway. Yeon caught the exchange. Her fork paused over her plate for exactly 1 second too long, and something cold moved behind her eyes before she smoothed her expression back into practiced boredom. Nobody else at the table noticed. MMA didn't notice either, not that night. She was too busy fighting a smile she didn't want anyone to see, especially not herself. Over the following weeks, Kang settled back into life at the estate, taking on responsibilities in his father's business, attending meetings, learning the weight of the Choi name. But every evening, without fail, he found his way back to MMA, in the garden, in the kitchen, on the back porch steps where they used to sit as children, watching the sun disappear behind the hills. "You've changed," she told him one night, sipping tea on those same steps. "Have I? You used to talk about everything. Now you just watch me." Kang was quiet for a long moment, turning his cup slowly in his hands. "Maybe I'm trying to figure out how to say something." "Say what?" He looked at her then, fully, unflinchingly. "MMA, I don't think what I feel for you is what a brother is supposed to feel for a sister." The teacup nearly slipped from her hands. "Kang, I've thought about this for years," he continued, quieter now but not looking away. "Since before I left, I told myself it was just gratitude, or nostalgia, or something I'd grow out of. But 4 years away only made it worse. I missed you the way you miss air." MMA stood up so fast her tea splashed onto the wooden porch. "You can't say things like that." "Why not?" "Because I'm older than you. Because I helped raise you. Because I used to change your diapers." "Kang, this isn't right." He stood too, closing the distance between them without touching her. "I don't care. You should." "I don't." His voice dropped, steady and sure. "I know every argument you're about to make. I've made them to myself 100 times, and none of them change how I feel when I walk into a room and you're in it." MMA turned away, arms wrapped around herself. "Please don't do this." "I'm not asking you to feel the same way tonight," Kang said gently. "I'm just asking you to know the truth. I'm not going anywhere." She didn't answer. She simply walked back into the house, her heart pounding in a way that terrified her. What neither of them realized was that Yeon had been standing just inside the kitchen door the entire time, one hand pressed flat against her chest, listening to every word. If you're still with me, drop a comment below telling me who you're rooting for in this story, and hit subscribe, because what Yeon does with what she just heard is going to change everything. From that night forward, something in Yeon shifted permanently. Her irritation curdled into something darker, something obsessive. She began watching MMA the way a predator watches prey, patient, calculating, waiting for the right moment. That moment arrived on a Saturday morning the family called Hair Day. It was tradition. Every few weeks, Yeon and Sora would take turns styling MMA's hair in the estate's private salon, a holdover from childhood when it had actually meant something sweet. Now it was simply an excuse for Yeon to have MMA trapped in a chair, unable to leave. "Hold still," Yeon said, running a comb roughly through MMA's thick curls. "Your hair is so difficult." MMA closed her eyes and said nothing, the way she'd trained herself to do years ago. Sora leaned against the counter, scrolling her phone, occasionally glancing up to watch. Then Yeon switched to Korean, smooth and casual, like she was commenting on the weather. "Look at her skin," she said, tilting MMA's head toward the mirror. "Like a map nobody wants to read." "Do you remember when we were kids?" Sora added, twirling a strand of MMA's hair around her finger like she was inspecting damaged goods. "And the other nannies used to ask why our family kept her around? Even they thought it was strange." "Mother has a soft heart," Yeon said, examining her own manicure. "It's her one flaw." "It's not a flaw to have loyalty," MMA said quietly, the first thing she'd said in 20 minutes. Yeon's eyes flicked to her in the mirror, surprised she'd spoken at all. Then she smiled, slow and sharp. "Loyalty. Is that what we're calling it? I always thought it was more like squatting." Sora snorted. 16 years in someone else's house. Yeon continued, switching effortlessly back to Korean, voice dropping into something almost gentle, almost intimate, the cruelest tone she owned. "Eating our food, sleeping under our roof, wearing clothes my mother bought you out of pity, and somehow, in your head, that's become a love story with my brother." MMA's hands, folded in her lap, tightened almost imperceptibly. "Does it not embarrass you?" Yeon asked, tilting her head. "Chasing a boy who only feels sorry for you? That's what it is, you know. Pity dressed up as feelings. Kang has always had a soft spot for broken things." Sora laughed again, but it was thinner this time, less certain. MMA said nothing. She simply closed her eyes and let the comb pull through her hair, and somewhere behind her ribs, she counted, the way she'd taught herself to count as a child whenever the other kids at school got cruel. 1, 2, 3. It didn't erase the words, it just gave her somewhere else to put them, until she was ready to use them. 27 years old, Yeon continued, still cutting vegetables in the kitchen like she's one of the staff. She basically is staff, Sora said, smiling into the mirror. Imagine, Yayan went on, tilting MMA's head toward the mirror with mock sweetness. My brother, choosing her. He could marry any CEO's daughter in Seoul. Instead, he wants a nanny with a broken face. Sora laughed. Does father know? Not yet. Yeon's eyes glittered in the mirror's reflection. But I'm setting something up. If she doesn't leave my brother alone, I'll make sure father throws her out before the month ends. Both girls laughed. MMA smiled. Sora caught it in the mirror, comb pausing mid-air. Why are you smiling? MMA opened her eyes, calm as still water. I just remembered something funny on TikTok. The insults continued for another 20 minutes. About her age, her scars, her place in the household, her audacity to be loved by a Choi son. MMA sat through every second of it without flinching, without translating, without giving them the satisfaction of a reaction. And in the hallway just outside the salon door, a pair of polished black dress shoes had gone completely still. Kang stood frozen against the wall, one hand curled into a fist at his side, listening to his sister say things about the woman he loved that made his blood run cold. He didn't storm in. He didn't confront them. Not yet. Instead, he did something far more dangerous. He waited. He listened. And he remembered every single word. If you're enjoying this story, smash that like button and comment part 2 if you already know you're going to want more. Because what happens next involves a stolen necklace, a courtroom of lies, and a reveal that's going to make Yeon regret every single word she just said. 3 weeks passed, and Kang said nothing to anyone about what he'd heard in the salon that day. Instead, he drove into the city one afternoon and walked into a small, unassuming jewelry shop tucked between a bakery and a bookstore, the kind of place with no flashy signage, because the owner didn't need one. Word of mouth was enough for a man who'd been crafting engagement rings for Seoul's wealthiest families for 30 years. I need something perfect, Kang told him. The old jeweler studied him for a moment. For someone perfect, I assume. More than perfect. Kang pulled out his phone, showing a photo of MMA laughing in the garden, sunlight catching the pale patches along her collarbone. She doesn't think she deserves beautiful things. I need a ring that argues with her. The jeweler smiled and got to work. 2 weeks later, Kang sat his parents down in the study, his heart hammering harder than it had during any business negotiation he'd ever closed. I want to marry MMA, he said simply. Mrs. Choi's teacup froze halfway to her lips. Mr. Choi leaned back in his chair, studying his son's face for a long moment. You've thought about this? His father finally asked. For years. She's older than you. By 3 years. It's not a scandal, father. It's a Tuesday. Mrs. Choi set down her cup, and to Kang's surprise, tears were gathering in her eyes. She's practically been my daughter since she was 11 years old, Kang. I've been waiting for you to say this out loud since you were 19. Mr. Choi exhaled slowly, then nodded once. You have my blessing. Both of you do. Adaeze would be proud of the woman her daughter became, and proud of the man who finally noticed. Only one member of the family remained in the dark. Yeon. And while Kang was quietly planning the proposal of a lifetime, Yeon was quietly planning something far uglier. It started small. A conversation with one of the household staff, a young maid named Ha-hoon, who'd only been working at the estate for 4 months, and desperately needed the job to stay. Yeon found her alone in the laundry room one afternoon. I need a favor, Yeon said, closing the door behind her. Miss Yeon, It's simple. Yeon's voice was calm, almost pleasant, which made it more frightening. There's a security camera in the east hallway, outside MMA's room. I need the footage from this Thursday deleted, all of it. And I need you to say you saw MMA near my mother's jewelry cabinet that afternoon, if anyone asks. Ha-hoon's face went pale. I can't lie about something like that. Yeon reached into her purse and set an envelope on the folding table between them, thick enough to make Ha-hoon's breath catch. Your little brother's surgery. I heard it's expensive. Silence stretched between them. You don't have to say much, Yeon continued smoothly. Just that you think you saw her. Uncertainty is even more convincing than certainty, don't you think? It makes people trust you more. Ha-hoon stared at the envelope for a long moment, then, slowly, picked it up. That Thursday, Yeon slipped into her mother's private dressing room while the household was occupied with dinner preparations. She lifted a heavy diamond necklace from its velvet case, an heirloom that had been in the Choi family for 3 generations, worth more than most people's houses. She wrapped it in a scarf and carried it down the hallway to MMA's room. MMA was in the garden at the time, exactly where Yeon knew she'd be. It took less than 90 seconds to slide the necklace beneath the false bottom of MMA's jewelry box, a hiding spot MMA didn't even know existed, but Yeon, who'd once helped decorate that very room as a teenager, knew intimately. By Friday morning, Mrs. Choi discovered the necklace missing. The mansion erupted into controlled chaos. Every room was searched, every staff member questioned, every closet opened. MMA helped search alongside everyone else, her stomach twisting with dread she couldn't name yet. Then, at 2:30 in the afternoon, a security guard called out from the East Wing. "I found it." Everyone rushed toward MMA's bedroom. The guard stood in the doorway, the diamond necklace dangling from his fingers, having pulled it from beneath the false bottom of her jewelry box. The room went silent. MMA felt the blood drain from her face. I didn't put that there." Mrs. Choi's hand flew to her mouth. Mr. Choi's expression cracked with something between confusion and heartbreak. Even Kang, standing frozen in the hallway behind everyone, couldn't find words fast enough to defend her. The evidence was too immediate, too physical, too damning. "I didn't steal it," MMA said again, quieter this time, looking around at faces that had loved her for 16 years and were now looking at her like a stranger. Nobody answered her. Behind the crowd, standing just far enough back to seem uninvolved, Yeon watched with an expression of perfectly rehearsed shock, and beneath it, something that looked almost like relief. The 3 days that followed were the longest of MMA's life. She was confined to the East Wing, technically not a prisoner, but escorted everywhere by a member of household security whenever she left her room, as though she might destroy evidence or flee in the night. Meals were brought to her instead of shared at the family table. Mrs. Choi visited once, on the second day, standing awkwardly in the doorway with red-rimmed eyes, unable to fully meet MMA's gaze. "I don't believe you did this," Mrs. Choi said quietly. "I want you to know that. But your father-in-law-to-be needs to see this handled properly, or the staff will never trust the process again." "I understand," MMA said, though understanding and accepting were not the same thing, and something in her chest had gone very cold and very still since the necklace was found. Kang came every night, sitting outside her door, because he wasn't permitted inside during the investigation, talking to her through the wood like they were children again, sharing secrets through a crack in a door frame. "I'll fix this," he told her the first night, voice rough with barely controlled anger. "I don't know how yet, but I will." "You can't fix what you can't see, Kang," MMA said, leaning her back against the door on her side, feeling the faint vibration of his voice through the wood. "Whoever did this was careful. They knew exactly where to hide it. They knew exactly when I'd be in the garden. This wasn't opportunity. This was planning. You think it was Yeon? I know it was Yeon." There was a long silence from the other side of the door. I heard what she said. "In the salon. 3 weeks ago, I was standing outside the whole time." MMA closed her eyes. "You never told me. I didn't know what to do with it yet. I was trying to figure out how to protect you from her, without starting a war inside my own family." His voice cracked slightly. "I should have said something sooner. Maybe if I had, none of this would have happened. This isn't your fault. It feels like it is." MMA pressed her palm flat against the door, an old habit from childhood, back when this same gesture used to mean, "I'm still here." During thunderstorms that used to frighten her as a little girl. "You didn't put that necklace in my room, Kang. You didn't pay Ha-hyun to lie. You've spent your whole life being the one person in this house who never made me feel small. Don't let 3 days of my life spent behind a locked door convince you otherwise." On the second night, she began recording. It started almost by accident. She'd turned on her old backup phone out of habit, meaning to check old photos of her mother for comfort, and instead found herself thinking clearly for the first time since the necklace was found. If no one would believe her voice, she would need something louder than her voice. She spent that night and the next reconstructing everything from memory, cross-referencing dates, quietly asking a sympathetic member of staff, an older woman named Mrs. Han, who had worked for the family even longer than MMA had been alive, about the estate's older backup security system, the one installed after a break-in years ago that most of the younger staff didn't even know existed. Yeon doesn't know about it, Mrs. Han whispered, glancing over her shoulder before slipping MMA a folded piece of paper with an access code written on it. Her father had it installed quietly, said a house this size needed a memory nobody could erase. By the third night, MMA had everything she needed. She sat on the floor of her room with her back against the bed frame, phone in her lap, and for the first time in 3 days, she allowed herself to cry, not from fear, not from grief, but from something closer to fury, hot and clean, and finally useful. Tomorrow, she whispered to the empty room, they're going to hear every word. If you're feeling that knot in your stomach right now, you're not alone. Drop a comment telling me if you saw this coming. And if you're enjoying the story, make sure you've hit that subscribe button, because we are just getting to the good part. 2 nights before the trial, Sora couldn't sleep. She lay in the dark replaying the week, the necklace, the search, the way Yeon had seemed almost calm through all of it, when everyone else in the house had been frantic. Sora had grown up watching her sister's moods the way sailors watch weather. Yeon panicked over spilled coffee. Yeon panicked over a delayed flight. But over a missing family heirloom worth a fortune, Yeon had been eerily, unnaturally composed. Sora got up and padded down the hallway toward the kitchen for water, and that's when she heard voices near the laundry room. She stopped in the shadow of the doorway. "Can't keep asking me to lie," Ha-hoon was whispering, her voice tight with fear. "I said what you wanted at the search. I can't say more in front of everyone. I can't. You'll say exactly what I tell you to say," Yeon's voice answered, low and controlled. "Or your brother's surgery gets postponed indefinitely, because I will personally make sure this family never hires your family again." Sora's stomach dropped straight through the floor. She stood frozen in the dark hallway for a long moment, after the voices stopped, and footsteps faded away in opposite directions. Her mind scrambled for an innocent explanation, a debt, a misunderstanding, anything, but none of it fit the ice in her sister's voice. She thought about waking their father right then. She got as far as standing outside his study door, hand raised to knock, before she lost her nerve. What if she was wrong? What if she'd misheard? Yeon was her sister, her triplet. They'd shared a womb, shared a childhood, shared every secret that mattered until this one. Sora told herself she needed proof before she blew up her own family over a hallway conversation she might have misunderstood. So she waited, and doubted herself, and said nothing for 2 more days, carrying the weight of what she'd heard like a stone in her chest, right up until the moment MMA stood up in that trial and started speaking in perfect Korean. And Sora finally understood, with sick clarity, that she'd had the chance to stop this and hadn't taken it. That guilt would sit with her long after the trial ended. It was, in its own way, the real reason her tears in that courtroom had been so genuine. She wasn't just grieving her sister's exposure, she was grieving her own silence. The main hall of the Choi estate had never felt so much like a courtroom. Chairs had been arranged in a wide semicircle facing the center of the room, where a single chair sat empty, waiting. Household staff lined the back wall, unusually quiet. The family lawyer sat near Mr. Choi, with a leather folder open on his lap. Even the head of estate security had been called in, standing stiffly by the door. MMA walked in wearing the same clothes she'd worn every day for the past 3 days. She hadn't slept, hadn't eaten much, hadn't been allowed to leave the East Wing without an escort, as if she might run. She sat in the empty chair without being told to. Mr. Choi stood first, his face carved from something heavier than sadness. "I have known this girl since she was a child," he said, voice low. "But facts don't lie. The necklace was found in her room. There is no other explanation being offered." Yeon sat beside her mother, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, playing the part of a devastated sister so convincingly that even Mrs. Choi reached over to squeeze her hand. "I just don't understand how she could do this to us," Yeon whispered, voice cracking beautifully. "After everything we gave her." Sora nodded beside her, silent tears sliding down her cheeks, tears that were, in fact, entirely real, though not for the reason anyone assumed. Sora had begun to suspect something wasn't right days ago, but suspicion without proof was worth nothing in a room like this. One by one, witnesses were called. The security guard confirmed where the necklace was found. Ha-Yuen, the young maid, stood with her hands trembling behind her back and said, in a small, rehearsed voice, that she believed she'd seen MMA near Mrs. Choi's dressing room that Thursday afternoon. She wouldn't meet MMA's eyes as she said it. The lawyer flipped through his folder. There is also the matter of Miss MMA's financial history. A withdrawal of $2,000 was made from her personal account 11 days ago. Can you explain that withdrawal? MMA lifted her chin. I sent money to my aunt in Lagos. She's ill. Do you have proof of this transfer? On my phone, which was taken from me 3 days ago and hasn't been returned. A murmur rippled through the room. Mr. Choi glanced toward the security chief, who shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet anyone's eyes, because the truth was, MMA's phone hadn't been taken as evidence at all. It had been taken on Yeon's quiet instruction, under the guise of helping the investigation, and had sat in a drawer in Yeon's room for 3 days, deliberately kept out of the trial, until Yeon was certain there was nothing on it that could help MMA's case. What Yeon didn't know was that MMA had a second, older phone, a backup she'd used for years, tucked in the drawer of her nightstand, still recording everything she needed it to. The necklace was appraised this morning, the lawyer continued. Its estimated resale value on the black market would be substantial. Yet nothing was found in Miss MMA's possession beyond the necklace itself. No buyer contacted. No attempt made to move or sell the item in the 3 days it sat in her room. Perhaps she hadn't found a buyer yet, Yeon offered smoothly from her seat. Perhaps, the lawyer said, in the tone of a man who didn't believe it for a second. Or perhaps the necklace was never hers to sell in the first place. Mr. Choi's eyes moved slowly across the room, from his weeping daughter, to his silent son, to the young woman sitting perfectly still in the center of it all, waiting for a moment none of them yet understood was coming. The head of estate security, a heavy-set man named Mr. Bay who had worked for the Choi family for over a decade, was called next. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable being asked to speak against a woman he'd known since she was a child, running through these same halls. Mr. Bay, the lawyer said, walk us through the timeline of that Thursday. The main camera in the east hallway malfunctioned sometime after 2 p.m., Mr. Bay said carefully. We didn't notice the gap in footage until the investigation began. Malfunctioned or was disabled? Mr. Bay hesitated. I couldn't say for certain, sir. The system logs showed an interruption. Could have been technical, could have been deliberate. I have no way of proving which. And who has access to disable that particular camera? Myself, the head housekeeper, and any of the Choi children, sir. The access codes haven't been changed since they were teenagers. A ripple moved through the room. Mrs. Choi's eyes flicked toward Yeon for the briefest second before she caught herself and looked away. Is it standard for a family member to request footage be reviewed or deleted? The lawyer pressed. It happens, Mr. Bay admitted. Privacy requests mostly. Someone doesn't want an embarrassing moment reviewed by staff. I don't typically ask questions when a member of the family makes the request. Did anyone make such a request that Thursday? Mr. Bay's eyes moved involuntarily toward Yeon before he caught himself. I would need to check the request log, sir. Please do. The room sat in tense silence while an assistant was sent to retrieve the log. Yeon's knee bounced beneath her skirt, a small, betraying motion that Sora noticed from beside her, and that made the sick feeling in Sora's stomach curdle into something closer to certainty. The log, when it arrived, showed a single entry from that Thursday afternoon. A request submitted under Yeon's household code, time-stamped 1:52 p.m., 45 minutes before the necklace was reported missing. Mr. Choi read the entry twice before setting it down on the table in front of him, his hand trembling slightly for the first time since the trial began. Is there anything else? Mr. Choi asked the room, his voice heavy with something between exhaustion and dread. Before I make my decision. That was when MMA finally stood. Every testimony had landed like another nail. Kang sat at the edge of the room, jaw clenched so tight it ached, watching the woman he loved get buried alive by lies he couldn't yet prove were lies. He'd spent 3 sleepless nights trying to find something, anything, to defend her with, and found nothing. He hated himself for it. She looked directly at Yeon, and when she opened her mouth, the words that came out weren't in English. They were in flawless, effortless Korean. You said my skin was a map nobody wanted to read, MMA said, her voice steady and clear, cutting through the room like a blade. You said I was a charity case. You said no man would want a woman who looked like me. You said, and I quote, If she doesn't leave my brother alone, I'll make sure father throws her out before the month ends. Yeon's handkerchief froze halfway to her face. Gasps rippled through the room. Mrs. Choi turned slowly toward her daughter, disbelief spreading across her face. You've understood every word we've ever said, Yeon whispered, color draining from her cheeks. Every word, MMA confirmed. For 16 years, my mother taught me Korean before I could walk, Yeon. I chose silence, because I never wanted to embarrass this family with your cruelty. I chose grace, because it was the only gift I had left, to give a house that had already given me everything else. If you've been enjoying this story, drop a comment right now telling me you did not see this twist coming. And if you're not already subscribed, now's the time, because MMA isn't done yet. She reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out her phone, setting it on the small table in the center of the room. 3 weeks ago, she continued, I started recording. Every conversation in that salon, every threat, every plan. She pressed play. Yeon's voice filled the room, crystal clear, speaking the exact words she'd said to Hapun in the laundry room, about the envelope, the camera footage, the false testimony. The recording had picked up more than Yeon ever imagined, including the moment she'd bragged to Sora, days later, about how easy it had been to hide the necklace where nobody would ever think to look. The room went utterly, deathly silent. I also have the estate's backup security server logs, MMA continued, voice never wavering. The main footage was deleted, yes. But this house has a secondary system Yeon doesn't know about, installed after the break-in 3 years ago. It shows her entering my room at 2:47 p.m. that Thursday, carrying something wrapped in a blue scarf. Sora broke first, sobbing into her hands. I didn't know she was going to frame her. I swear. I only knew about the insults. I didn't know about the necklace. I swear on my life. Sora, Mr. Choi's voice cracked like a whip. Yeon shot to her feet, face contorted with panic now instead of practiced grief. This is fabricated. She's lying. She probably planted that footage herself. The timestamp is verified by the security company directly, the family lawyer said quietly, having already pulled the logs onto his tablet. This isn't fabricated, Miss Choi. Mrs. Choi stood slowly, staring at her daughter like she was seeing a stranger wearing her child's face. 16 years, she whispered. 16 years of watching that girl grow up in this house, and this is what you did to her. Yoon opened her mouth, but nothing came out. There was nothing left to say. Mr. Choi's voice, when it finally came, was quiet and absolutely final. You are no longer welcome under this roof, Yeon. Pack your things. Father, please. You framed an innocent woman for theft. You paid a member of my staff to lie under oath in my own home. I built this family on trust, and you tried to burn it down out of jealousy. He didn't raise his voice once. He didn't need to. You have until morning. Sora, still crying, turned to MMA. I'm so sorry. I should have said something sooner. I should have. You didn't know, MMA said quietly. But you know now. Mrs. Choi crossed the room and pulled MMA into her arms, holding her the way she should have been holding her for years. You stopped being our nanny's daughter a long time ago, she whispered into MMA's hair. You have always been my daughter too. Mr. Choi placed a hand on MMA's shoulder, his eyes wet in a way MMA had never seen. Adayeze would be so proud of the woman you became. And then, from the back of the room, Kang finally moved. He crossed the floor slowly, deliberately, every eye in the room following him. He stopped directly in front of MMA, and without a word, he lowered himself onto one knee. The room gasped again, a different kind of gasp this time. He pulled a small velvet box from his jacket pocket, hands steady despite everything that had just happened. I bought this 3 weeks ago, he said, voice thick, before any of this. Because I already knew. I've known since I was 14 years old, watching you laugh in the garden, with a comeback so quick it made grown men flinch. MMA's hands flew to her mouth. MMA, Kang said, opening the box to reveal a ring that caught the light like it had been waiting its whole existence for this exact moment. You raised me. You protected me. You survived things in this house that should have broken you. And instead, you became the strongest person I've ever known. Will you marry me? Tears streamed freely down MMA's face now, 16 years of composure finally cracking open in front of everyone who'd once made her feel small. Yes, she whispered, then louder, laughing through the tears. Yes. The room erupted, Mrs. Choi crying openly, Mr. Choi clapping Kang on the shoulder, Sora sobbing with something that finally looked like genuine joy. Later that night, long after the celebration had wound down and the house had finally gone quiet, MMA found herself standing on the same back porch steps where she and Kang used to sit as children. The ring felt strange and warm on her finger. Still unfamiliar, still not quite believable. Can't sleep? Kang's voice came from behind her. Too much happened today. He sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, the way they used to sit when he was 14, and terrified of leaving for boarding school. Any regrets? MMA turned the ring slowly on her finger, watching it catch the porch light. I keep waiting to feel guilty. Your sister is out there tonight, with a suitcase and nowhere to go, and I keep waiting for that to feel like a tragedy instead of justice. It's not your job to grieve what she did to herself. I know. MMA exhaled slowly. I just spent 16 years being taught that my feelings were an inconvenience. It's strange, being allowed to just feel relieved. Kang took her hand, the one with the ring, and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, like it was the most natural thing in the world. You're allowed to feel anything you want now. Relief, joy, even nothing at all, if that's what you need. What about you? Any regrets? One, he admitted. I regret waiting so long to say something. I had 100 chances before tonight. I was a coward every single time. You weren't a coward. You were 14, then 18, then a boy figuring out how to become a man his father would respect. You needed the time. Maybe. Or maybe I was just scared you'd say no. MMA leaned her head against his shoulder, something in her finally, fully unclenching after 16 years of bracing for the next unkind thing. I almost did say no. Every reason I gave you back then was real. I still believe some of them. And now? Now I think the people who love us don't always follow the rules we think should apply to them. You never once treated me like the help, Kang. Not even when I was. They sat there a long while, not speaking, just breathing in the quiet the house hadn't offered either of them in years. Somewhere inside, Mrs. Choi was already on the phone with a wedding planner, far too early, and far too excited to care. Somewhere inside, Sora was staring at her ceiling, still turning over the guilt she hadn't earned forgiveness for yet. And somewhere beyond the gates, in a rented room above a convenience store, Yuan sat awake too, staring at nothing, already planning her next move. Outside the estate gates, a single suitcase sat on the gravel driveway. Yuan stood beside it in the cold morning air, watching through the wrought iron bars as light spilled from every window of the mansion she'd grown up in. The sound of celebration drifting faintly across the courtyard. She had spent 16 years trying to make MMA feel like she didn't belong. In the end, Yuan was the one standing outside the gates. In the weeks that followed, the Choi household slowly found a new rhythm. Yuan's absence left a strange quiet in rooms that used to hum with her sharp opinions and sharper tongue, but it was a quiet everyone, even Sora, found themselves grateful for eventually. Sora sought MMA out in the garden one afternoon, wringing her hands the way she used to as a child, before admitting to some small crime, a broken vase, a stolen cookie. I need to tell you something, Sora said. I heard Yen and Ha-un talking 2 nights before the trial. In the hallway, near the laundry room, I heard enough to know something was wrong, and I didn't say anything. I told myself I needed proof. I told myself I might be wrong, but really, I think I was just scared of what it would mean if I was right. MMA set down her book slowly. You could have stopped it. I know. Sora's voice cracked. I've thought about that every hour since the trial. I let you sit through that entire courtroom, not knowing if anyone would believe you, when I already had a piece of the truth in my hands. MMA studied her for a long moment. Sora, who had laughed along with every cruel joke for years, who had called her the nanny more times than MMA could count, but who had also cried real tears in that courtroom, who had broken first and told the truth the moment it mattered most. I'm not going to pretend that didn't hurt, MMA said finally. But you told the truth when it counted, Sora. That matters more than I think you realize. Can we start over? Not pretend the last 16 years didn't happen. Just start being honest from here. MMA considered this, then held out her hand. I'd like that. Sora took it, and something between them, not quite sisterhood yet, but the fragile beginning of it, finally took root. Wedding planning consumed the household after that. Mrs. Choi threw herself into it, with the ferocity of a woman making up for years of quiet apologies she'd never spoken aloud. Fabric swatches covered the dining table for weeks. Mr. Choi, gruff as ever, was discovered more than once quietly researching venues on his study computer, pretending to be reviewing business contracts if anyone walked in. Kang, for his part, seemed incapable of being in a room with MMA without finding some excuse to touch her hand, her shoulder, the small of her back. Small, constant reassurances that this was real, that she was real, that after everything the universe had finally decided to be kind to both of them. MMA let herself believe, for the first time in her life, that peace might actually be allowed to last. She was wrong, but she wouldn't find that out for another 3 weeks. 3 weeks after the engagement, a man in an unremarkable gray suit walked into Mr. Choi's office without an appointment. "Mr. Choi," he said, setting a slim folder on the desk. "My name doesn't matter. What matters is what's in here." Mr. Choi opened the folder slowly. Inside were shipping manifests, wire transfer records, and photographs of his daughter Yeon, standing on a loading dock with men Mr. Choi did not recognize and did not like the look of. "Your daughter has been moving money through your export business for the better part of a year," the man said. "Small amounts, careful amounts. The kind designed not to be noticed by anyone who isn't looking for them." Mr. Choi's hands went very still on the folder. "Why bring this to me now?" "Because the people she's been working with don't appreciate loose ends," the man said. "And your daughter, as of 3 weeks ago, became a very large loose end." Down the hall, unaware of the conversation happening behind her father's closed office door, MMA was in the garden with Mrs. Choi, laughing over wedding fabric swatches, sunlight warm on her shoulders, for the first time in longer than she could remember. She had no idea that the second folder, the one she'd kept quiet during the trial, the one detailing a business arrangement Yeon had made behind her father's back, was about to become the least of anyone's problems, because whoever Yeon had been working with wasn't finished with the Choi family yet. And this time, it wouldn't be a missing necklace that brought the house to its knees. If you want to see what happens when Yeon's secret finally catches up to the entire family, comment part 2 below and let me know. Because MMA and Kang are about to find out that surviving Yeon's jealousy was only the beginning. MMA didn't know any of this yet. In the garden, sunlight on her shoulders, fabric swatches scattered across the blanket in front of her, she was simply happy, a feeling so unfamiliar after 16 years of bracing for the next unkind thing that she almost didn't trust it. Mrs. Choi held up 2 shades of ivory silk, debating aloud, unable to decide, and MMA laughed at some joke Sora made under her breath. And for one golden, uninterrupted afternoon, nothing existed beyond the walls of that garden. No trial, no necklace, no sister standing outside the gates with a suitcase and a grudge that hadn't finished growing yet. It wouldn't last. Nothing gold ever does. Not in this family, not for long. Somewhere behind a closed office door, her future father-in-law was staring at photographs that would unravel everything she thought she'd finally won. But for now, in the garden, she let herself have it. The sunlight, the laughter, the ring catching light on her finger, the man who'd waited 14 years to say out loud what he'd apparently always known, in front of every single person who'd ever doubted her. Whatever was coming for the Choi family next, it would have to wait until morning. For one more afternoon, MMA was simply allowed to be happy, and nobody in that garden was cruel enough to take it from her. If you've made it this far, you already know what to do. Subscribe, like, and comment part 2, so I know to bring you back for what happens next.